is up, all of our liberty-loving friends? This is another fantastic episode of Good Morning Liberty. My name is Nate Thurston. I'm by myself. Charlie has been sick all week. And with Christmas coming up next week, going to see the family and everything, so far we've just decided it's best for us to not be around each other. So I didn't plan on doing a whole week's worth of shows by myself this week at all, but that's what has been happening. There's been a lot of stuff in the news, and so we've had plenty to talk about. This show, it's gonna concern Venezuela. That's what it's going to be about. Trump announced a blockade last night, the blockade specifically of sanctioned oil. So we'll get into that. He also announced that he's going to be addressing the nation tonight. And that is leading plenty of people, including myself, to speculate that it has something to do with Venezuela. And so he said this right here: "My fellow Americans, I will be giving an address to the nation tomorrow night," said this last night, "live from the White House at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. I look forward to seeing you then. It has been a great year for our country, and the best is yet to come. President Donald J. Trump." So yeah, my total speculation on this, just so you know, 100% speculation on this, of course, is that it has something to do with Venezuela. This coming on the same day that he announces a massive blockade. And I'll read you his statement about that here in a second. And of course, as I'll mention a little bit later, if I want to be a little bit more cynical and conspiratorial about this announcement and the timing of everything, the clock is up on the release of the Epstein files on Friday. And my assumption, just throwing it out there, total speculation, is that there's going to be some kind of clock put on the Maduro regime tonight. And that clock is probably going to run out on Friday. And we're going to be talking about either the resignation of Maduro and whatever new leader is going to come in, or we're going to be talking about a war. I don't know. Or some kind of a deal. There could be a deal too. Now that's, once again, total speculation. He could be addressing the nation to announce a new meme coin tonight. Like there could be a new crypto coin that he's announcing. It could be anything. There's no way of knowing. I don't know what it's going to be. Just absolutely no telling. But the timing seems very suspect here. So he posted this out last night or yesterday evening. He says, "Venezuela is completely surrounded by the largest armada ever assembled in the history of South America. It will only get bigger, and the shock to them will be like nothing they have ever seen before. Until such time as they return to the United States of America all of the oil, land, and other assets that they have previously stole from us. The illegitimate Maduro regime is using oil from these stolen oil fields to finance themselves, drug terrorism, human trafficking, murder, and kidnapping. For the theft of our assets and many other reasons, including terrorism, drug smuggling, and human trafficking, the Venezuelan regime has been designated a foreign terrorist organization." The whole thing. "Therefore, today, I am ordering a total and complete blockade of all sanctioned oil tankers going into and out of Venezuela. The illegal aliens and criminals that the Maduro regime has sent into the United States during the weak and inept Biden administration are being returned to Venezuela at a rapid pace. America will not allow criminals, terrorists, or other countries to rob, threaten, or harm our nation. Likewise, will not allow a hostile regime to take our oil, land, or any other assets, all of which must be returned to the United States immediately. Thank you for your attention to this matter. DJT. POTUS." So this is, the screenshot I took was from a page that had highlighted how many times he mentioned oil, and then I underlined how many times he mentioned the word drug. And he did say oil 5 times, and he said drug 2 times. And this, let me do a little bit more of this story, and then we'll talk some about this. So this is from Politico. Trump orders blockade of Venezuela. I just read that. Trump accused Venezuela of stealing from the United States in the social media post Tuesday. Also said he would classify the Maduro government as a foreign terrorist organization. The move comes the same day that the Treasury Department declared the Clan del Golfo, I don't know how you say that, drug traffickers in neighboring Colombia to be a foreign terrorist organization. Earlier this year, the Trump administration began a series of targeted military strikes on boats in international waters in the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans near South and Central America that have killed nearly 100 people suspected of smuggling drugs. Those strikes are part of the broader pressure campaign on Maduro. Wiles, that's Susie Wiles, told Vanity Fair, as Trump seeks to oust the Venezuelan leader who was reelected last year. Kind of. I added that part. Emphasis mine. Quote, and this has to do with the oil that they're gonna blockade. We estimate sanctioned only tanker interdiction threatens about 300,000 barrels per day of Venezuela's 900,000 barrel a day total crude exports. Not enough to move the needle in a global oil market. So you're not going to see, 300,000 barrels a day. Not going to see massive moves, more than likely, in the oil market, at least not long term. While the blockade isn't likely to affect U.S. prices, it will have an impact on Maduro. Let me get through here. The loss of income to Venezuela would account to up to 80% of government revenue. This guy said that loss of income will lead to shortages affecting transportation, food adequacy, agriculture, and the importation of goods. I'd expect inflation to skyrocket and massive and immediate migration from Venezuela to neighboring countries. So the point here is that this is going to be really bad for Venezuela. It's a third of their oil exports, and like all of their money comes from oil, of the little money that they are still able to make off of that with all the sanctions and having to sell stuff at lower prices and stuff like that. So we're in a crazy time right now because you could talk about the Venezuela thing, and it seems to have, honestly, especially with some of the things going on right now, like not a lot to do with this whole drug trafficking thing. It seems more like how we started this. That was like our foot in the door scenario to get people on board. And once again, like I mentioned yesterday, this is close to being Trump's most popular policy. As far as how things think, Trump has changed things for the better or for the worse. He's got the highest ratings on this whole drug trafficking thing and his actions against drug cartels. And so, it's pretty popular, but unfortunately it's built on a lot of lies. And you guys listening to this, you guys know that, but a small amount of the drugs that come into the U.S. come in from Venezuela. And when this whole thing started, they were talking about fentanyl. And I can tell that they've backed off on the fentanyl thing because there's like no evidence for the fentanyl in the first place. Our own U.S. government says that there's no evidence for the fentanyl in the first place. So they started with that, something super deadly. I told you about how deadly it was in yesterday's show, to get people really on board because people don't like that. I mean, even though I think people should be able to do whatever they want to their own bodies, like, sure, I don't like that these drugs are being smuggled across our border or brought in via the ocean or whatever. I don't like that whole thing. I know it's bad for Americans. It's bad for our country. I get that. I totally understand that. And so this has largely been popular with a lot of people. And if you are against Trump's actions, then you're in favor of the narco-terrorist. You're a narco-terrorist sympathizer. You must be getting paid by the cartels, something like that. And it morphed away from fentanyl because there's no evidence for the fentanyl. And now it's about cocaine and drugs. And then, but even the boats that they're blowing up, like those boats can't make it to America. We know for a fact those boats can't travel from Venezuela to America. We know they're going somewhere else. And then we have no evidence that those drugs are bound for America. Actually, there's more evidence that those drugs are bound for Europe and Africa. And so the whole drug thing doesn't stand up to any factual scrutiny whatsoever. And so then we're left with, what is this actually about? What do they want here? And we're going to talk about the oil thing. I think it really is always about the oil. And at the end of the day, what I really wish we would get from our government especially someone that I voted for, is like, just be straight up with the American people and then let them decide. I don't think the president should have this power to randomly point at something and say it's dangerous and then blow it up. And so I think Congress should vote on that. And I think the people should decide, but I think they should decide on what this is actually about, not based on some kind of a lie like WMDs and Iraq or any of the other reasons that we've gone to wars in the past. And maybe they want to make the case that, hey, it'd be pretty bad if Venezuela just falls into the arms of China and Russia. You don't want them having that kind of control. You look at a map, Venezuela relatively pretty close compared to all the other countries that we're involved in. And wouldn't it be better if we controlled that and all their oil and their minerals, all those things, than having China or Russia that close to us controlling this thing? Like, sure. And, I understand that argument. I don't like it. I don't want to spend money on it. I don't want to be forced to pay for it under threat of imprisonment. Like, I don't want to do that, but I would at least respect that they just come right out and say it. But that's not what we get. I'm going to play this video from Senator Chris Murphy, and I kind of hesitated to do this because I just can't stand Chris Murphy. And we make fun of him a lot. He's been on Don't Bleep of the Week plenty of times. But I figure out how to play this. He says he just came out of the classified briefing with Marco Rubio and Pistol Pete Hegseth. And these are the details that he was able to share. It's Chris Murphy. Can't stand the guy. But here's this.
So I just came from this classified briefing, the first that I have received, that the full Senate has received, on the military strikes in the Caribbean and in the Eastern Pacific. Well, I obviously can't tell you any classified information I learned. I can tell you this, that the administration had no legal justification for these strikes and had no national security justification for these strikes. Let me just get to the question of the national security justification. What they did admit is that there's no fentanyl coming to the United States from Venezuela. Venezuela is mainly exporting cocaine, but almost all of the cocaine that is coming out of Venezuela into the Caribbean isn't going to the United States, it's going to Europe. And so we are spending billions of your taxpayer dollars to wage a war in the Caribbean to stop cocaine from going from Venezuela to Europe. That is a massive waste of national security resources and of your taxpayer dollars. What we also learned is that there's no legal justification for what is happening right now in the Caribbean and in the Eastern Pacific. The president in this briefing, his Secretary of Defense and Secretary of State, said that the justification legally is that these cartels are designated by the president as terrorist organizations. Okay, the president does have the ability to designate certain groups as terrorist organizations, but that does not give him the ability or the authorization to carry out military strikes. A designated terrorist organization allows the president to impose sanctions on those organizations and those individuals, or deny passports to the leaders of those organizations. Only Congress, only the American public can authorize war, and there is just no question that these are acts of war.
All right, that's enough from him. So, good point there in the group, Mago. I mean, he talks about this being a tremendous waste of your taxpayer dollars, and I could be wrong, but something tells me he wasn't super against all the money we've spent in Ukraine, and probably many other places. And in addition to that, tons of other programs that he would like to waste your taxpayer money on. So, not a great role model to go to for this, but I thought it was interesting to hear from someone who says they learned these things in a classified briefing. Kind of have to take his word for that. So there's something I wanted to do here, and I'm sorry if this gets a little bit long, but I just felt it was important because I have a feeling tonight's announcement concerns Venezuela, with it being announced same day as we announced this blockade, and I can't ignore the whole Epstein files thing on Friday. So the timing fits for something new to kick off, honestly. Trump mentioned until such time as they return to the U.S. all of the oil, land, and other assets that they previously stole from us. So it would be weird to think that like Venezuela stole land from us that's in their country, but there are U.S. companies that were operating in Venezuela, and there are still some. He gave a special exemption essentially to Chevron to keep pumping oil out of Venezuela. I found this interesting article. It was super long. I trimmed down, I cut out a bunch of stuff from it, called The Rise and Fall of a Petrostate. It's about Venezuela from the Council on Foreign Relations. And it goes through some of these things that have happened over history and how we got to this point. And that's really important to understand, because if this does come back to, we used to have U.S. companies operating semi-freely in Venezuela, and they were making money, and you were making money, and you guys were pumping way more oil, and weren't things so much better when we were sort of controlling that or working, peacefully with you guys, and we had a market and all of that, and that's what we want to get back to. Like, if we're going to land on this as sort of the reasoning for why we're about to do whatever we're about to do, or why what's ever about to happen is about to happen, it's important to understand, like, what is it that we're trying to go back to, and how do we get to this point? So it's important to realize that Venezuela itself, like the government, those companies, like, they didn't start this whole oil market in Venezuela. Like, they were poor. It took outside foreign companies coming in and investing tons of money. And this is in the early 1900s, with the equivalent of multi-billions of dollars, building up this industry in Venezuela. Like, you could say for Venezuela, and they benefited from it also. It's for those companies as well. So we know that by the 1930s, 3 foreign companies, Gulf, Royal Dutch, Shell, and Standard Oil, controlled 98% of the Venezuelan oil market. Okay. Let's see. The Hydrocarbons Law of 1943 was the first step in trying to funnel these funds into the government, requiring foreign companies to give half of their oil profits to the state. So in 1943, within 5 years, the government's income increased 6-fold. They did a pact called the Punto Fijo Pact in 1958. Let's see. Venezuela elected its first stable democratic government that year. Venezuela's 3 major political parties signed this pact, which guaranteed that state jobs and, notably, oil rents would be parceled out to the 3 parties in proportion to voting results. While the pact sought to guard against dictatorship and usher in democratic stability, it ensured that oil profits would be concentrated in the state. Then we get OPEC. Venezuela was a founding member of OPEC, along with Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia. Many other countries have been added since then. So that's important to note also. That same year, in 1960, Venezuela established its first state oil company, the Venezuelan Petroleum Corporation, and increased oil companies' income tax to 65% of their profits. Then we got the 1970s boom. In 1973, a 5-month OPEC embargo on countries that were backing Israel's Yom Kippur war quadrupled oil prices and made Venezuela the country with the highest per capita income in Latin America. Over 2 years, the windfall added $10 billion to state coffers, giving way to rampant graft and mismanagementism, as we like to call it here. Analysts estimate that as much as $100 billion was embezzled between 1972 and 1997 alone. Then we get the PDVSA. I'm not going to try to pronounce every single word that's in here, but it's a state-owned oil company, PDVSA. In 1976, amid the oil boom, President Perez nationalized the oil industry, creating state-owned PDVSA to oversee all exploring, producing, refining, and exporting of oil. The president also allowed PDVSA to partner with foreign oil companies as long as it held 60% equity in joint ventures and critically structured the company to run as a business with minimal government regulation. Then in the 1980s, we had too much oil. So oil prices went down a bunch. Venezuela's economy was hit pretty hard by that. It accrued massive foreign debt by purchasing foreign refineries like Citgo in the United States. In 1989, the president reelected months earlier, launched a fiscal austerity package as part of the financial bailout by the International Monetary Fund. People were upset about this, by the way. Hugo Chavez tried to do a coup in 1992. In the 1990s, they got some reforms, started letting some companies kind of come back in. Like I was doing a lot of research on this, trying to understand, like, okay, well, they nationalized these companies in 1976, or they made sure they were 60% owned by this state-controlled oil company, PDVSA. And so, like, what about Chavez nationalizing the oil companies in 2007? How do you nationalize it if it's already nationalized? And essentially, they did some reforms, and they needed some help for the economy, so they let some companies come in and have a little bit more control over their own direction in the 90s, which apparently made people very mad. Chavez was elected president in 1998 on a socialist platform, pledging to use Venezuela's vast oil wealth to reduce poverty and inequality. It worked for a couple of years. While his costly Bolivarian missions expanded social services and reduced poverty by 20%, he also took several steps that precipitated a long and steady decline in the country's oil production, which peaked in the late 1990s. His decision to fire thousands of experienced PDVSA workers who had taken part in an industry strike in 2002 to 2003 gutted the company of important technical expertise. This sounds like stories we've heard from socialists and commies all over the place. You end up getting rid of the experts, and you're just left with a state-owned oil company filled up with your friends, and then you guys have the expertise to figure out how to get the darned oil out of the ground, which is essentially what they ended up with. Beginning in 2005, Chavez provided subsidized oil to several countries in the region, including Cuba, through an alliance known as PetroCaribe. Over the course of Chavez's presidency, which lasted until 2013, strategic petroleum reserves dwindled and government debt more than doubled. Let's see, what else we got here? Chavez ended term limits, effectively took control of the Supreme Court, harassed the press and closed independent outlets, and nationalized hundreds of private businesses and foreign-owned assets, such as oil projects run by ExxonMobil and ConocoPhillips. The reforms paved the way for Maduro to establish a dictatorship years after Chavez's death. So then we get to the Maduro stuff. And by the way, some of the companies that were there that were operating kind of gave in to the nationalization, especially Chevron. There were a couple like Exxon and Conoco. They were like, no, we're just not going to do it. And so they took all their stuff and ended up like suing. They went to court, like international court, and they decided it was illegal, and they got paid out $1 billion a piece, even though they had claimed it cost them 10 to 12 billion, something like that. Like, it's not just like the value of those assets, it's the value of what they were going to produce over time. It's the value of all the investment and getting those things there and digging the wells and bringing in people, setting up this entire industry. And so, yeah, they I would assume, got a pretty bad deal when it comes to the payout of all their stuff getting taken. Yeah, that's it. It was 1.6 billion, and one got 1.6 and one got 1.8, I believe, something like that. But in their cases, they had claimed that it cost them 12 billion, something like that. Of course, they're going to claim as much as possible. And we don't agree with the government coming in and nationalizing and seizing control of these companies and their assets. Like, totally don't agree with that. But now it seems to be the case that what Trump is pointing back to when it comes to stealing land and assets and oil is these companies getting their stuff seized by the government, both in 2007 and kind of in 1976 as well, although the 1976 thing was a lot more organized. It's stemmed from a law that was passed 5 years earlier. And so there was kind of some warning that this was coming, and more people agreed to it because it was way more structured. And so it wasn't quite as crazy as what happened in '07 with Chavez. If you're watching on YouTube right now, you'll see this chart that I have up here, and pretty crazy to see how much their oil production has gone down. This chart just goes up to 2018. It's gotten worse since then, and it's just a great, like, you gotta imagine. Would you rather get, say, 30% of 3.5 million barrels a day? Like, if you're running the government, would you rather get 30% of 3.5 million barrels a day, or would you rather get, like, I think 60%, 70%, I don't know what they ended up with after all the increased taxes and stuff like that, 60, 70% of what is now a little less than I think it's like 1 million barrels a day is what they're doing. And it just turns out, even though it wasn't like total state ownership of all the assets, it was way better economically for them to take a smaller portion and allow people, the experts, the people who are really good at this, because they were going to be able to make a profit off of it, allow them to produce a ton of oil. I found this article on this energy website. I can't remember the name of the guy who wrote it, but I thought they did a good job summing some things up. Venezuela nationalized its oil resources in 1976, gaining control of the oil fields formerly run by Exxon, ConocoPhillips, and Chevron, and funding massive social welfare spending. The share of oil revenue that went to the government of Venezuela and its people reached 79%, with only 21% going to the state oil company, PDVSA, though that has declined sharply over the years. Now, what they mean by this is there was a lot of mismanagementism going on, as is sometimes the case when it comes to state-directed economies. They decided they were going to distribute a bunch of the income that was coming in from the oil instead of taking that and reinvesting it and making sure they could keep getting oil in the future. And since they had, in 2005, they had fired like all of the experts that they had working for them. I don't know what happened to those people afterwards. And then they got rid of the profit-seeking entities, which also employed a bunch of experts because they were trying to make a profit. They just decided that these machines were just going to keep pumping, and they were going to sell the oil, and then they were going to distribute most of the income that came off of those things. And then it turned out they needed to be reinvesting in the industry. Socialists don't think into the future. They only think about right now. That's it. Let's see. Here's the China part that they wrote about that I thought was pretty good. After the election of Chavez in 1999, Venezuela built its relationship with China and now exports a majority of its oil to China's fast-growing economy. After the Trump administration ended Chevron's license to operate in Venezuela in May, the percentage of Venezuela's oil exports that went to China reached 90%. 3 months later, the Trump administration reinstated Chevron's license, despite an official embargo on importing Venezuelan oil and a 25% tariff on nations that buy oil from Venezuela. Most of their oil exports go to China, and it's not a ton. I think the numbers are like 500,000 barrels a day, something like that, maybe a little bit more, which is a very small percentage of the amount of oil that China uses. But even if you were to separate that out and look at the percentage of oil that China imports, it only equates to about 5% of the oil that China imports. So it's 5% of the imports and then a much smaller percentage of the total amount of oil that China, say, needs. But it still could affect them a little bit in the long term, I guess. They go on to say nothing is simple, and Trump's buildup of military resources aimed at Venezuela isn't just about oil. It's in part about U.S. hegemony in the Western Hemisphere, and removing an antagonistic leader. Nicolas Maduro has been a target of Trump going back to his first administration. It's about countering the growth of China as a superpower, and perhaps it's a little bit about the illegal drug trade. Maybe it's about Trump's war on renewable energy. The most jaded voices might even say it's about using up some of the U.S. military's massive supply of armaments to ensure the need for new orders from Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Grumman, and General Dynamics. I'm sympathetic to that one, too. I think that's why we keep giving people weapons all the time, because then we need to come back and say, oh, hey, we're out of weapons. Need you guys to pay for some more ammunition. That's too bad. Last thing they say here, but mostly it's about oil. It's about creating the conditions to overthrow Maduro and denationalize the Venezuelan oil industry, and about protecting the Guyana oil fields from Venezuela, and about preventing Guyanese nationalization of its resources, and about blocking oil exports to China. It's about protecting the billions of dollars flowing to Exxon investors like Vanguard, BlackRock, and donors of both Republican and Democratic parties. Sure. Could be the case. Now, that's all fine and dandy. And I think a lot of us can agree with that. And as I said before we started talking about this, I do wish they would just come out and say, hey, isn't it super dangerous that China and Russia are becoming really close friends with Venezuela? And you look at a map and Venezuela's right there. This is kind of dangerous. And China is going to become a global superpower, and they're going to take Taiwan, and this is all going to cost us a bunch of money. And we don't like China. I'm not a fan of China, and so we got to stop them from getting this Venezuelan oil. I actually feel like a lot of people would be pretty sympathetic to that entire argument. I really think they would. It's the whole drug thing that's really annoyed me, because it was first off, it was a lie with the fentanyl, and then it's even a lie with whether or not the boats are coming to the U.S., and they do that to get some kind of a moral backing for what, once again, by all accounts, just turns into another potential war or conflict over oil and natural resources. Natural resources are important. We need them. They are important. Keeps the whole thing going. I get it. That's why this keeps happening. Very important stuff. Make that case to the American people, so they can tell their representatives to vote for or against this, whether or not they want to pay for this thing. I would vote against it, but I would have much more respect for the argument. But then there's a problem. Here's where the problem comes in. And maybe you guys have heard this before. Maduro essentially offered Trump, like, hey, you can have whatever you want. Like, the only thing that Maduro said the U.S. couldn't have was Maduro resigning. Other than that, he was like, you guys can have everything. Just whatever you guys want. It's cool. You can have it. And so if it's about all those things, it gets a little bit muddier when you're thinking about, the guy running the country already said he would give us everything. And so what is this? It's probably still about the same thing. They just want to be in control of the person saying this. This is an article from the New York Times from a little bit ago, titled, Venezuela's Maduro offered the U.S. his nation's riches to avoid conflict. Venezuelan officials, hoping to end their country's clash with the U.S., offered the Trump administration a dominant stake in Venezuela's oil and other mineral wealth in discussions that lasted 4 months, according to multiple people close to the talks. The far-reaching offer remained on the table as the Trump administration called the government of Nicolas Maduro a narco-terror cartel, amassed warships in the Caribbean, and began blowing up boats that American officials say were carrying drugs from Venezuela. Under a deal discussed between the senior U.S. official and Mr. Maduro's top aides, the Venezuelan strongman offered to open up all existing and future oil and gold projects to American companies, give preferential contracts to American businesses, reverse the flow of Venezuelan oil exports from China to the United States instead, and slash his country's energy and mining contracts with the Chinese, Iranian, and Russian firms. In Washington, American officials offer differing assessments of the talks. One U.S. official said the reports of negotiations over the lifting of sanctions and access to the Venezuelan market was not an accurate assessment of what took place. So, okay, this is from the New York Times. Keep that in mind. But other American officials said U.S. and Venezuelan officials held repeated talks over what economic normalization would look like, including access to Venezuelan energy markets by American companies and a lifting of U.S. sanctions. As Mr. Grenell and Mr. Maduro's envoys negotiated the deal, the leader of Venezuela's main opposition movement, Maria Corina Machado, pitched her own economic proposal in New York. She argued that even greater economic wealth, $1.7 trillion in 15 years, awaited U.S. companies in Venezuela if her movement launched a political transition. As Machado, by the way, was recently awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Ms. Machado's economic advisor said the investment deals offered by Mr. Maduro would never materialize without democracy, rule of law, and individual freedoms. Now, that's all fine and good, and I love those words. The idea of those words. The democracy one, that's a little tricky, you know. But we have economic relations with a lot of countries that don't have those things, like are really, really bad on those things. A lot of oil-producing nations, actually, that just don't have those things. Maybe they have rule of law, I guess. Kind of. Like whatever their kings or dictators want. But yeah. What Maduro offers investors is not stability, it's control. Control maintained through terror. The Trump administration has shown a clear intention to not fall for these offers of easy solutions. They go on to say Venezuela currently produces about 1 million barrels of oil a day, down from about 3 million when Chavez took power. The bulk of Venezuela's oil exports go to China, except for about 100,000 barrels per day that the U.S. energy giant Chevron sells to the United States. Most experts agree that Venezuela could quickly ramp up oil output with a major injection of foreign capital, though they differ on whether it's achievable. Let's see. Our message to the oil companies is, we want you here, certainly, Ms. Machado told American corporate representatives in June. We want you here not producing crumbs of a couple 100,000 barrels a day. We want you here producing millions of barrels a day. So, what are we doing here? I mean, it's like quite a big risk to take. You know, I can't even take the drug thing seriously. Like, just none of it lines up. Like, sure, they say that, and then I agree with. I said this yesterday. The boats that they're blowing up probably got drugs on them. Probably. I mean, you know, it might have slipped in a couple in there that were some guys fishing or something like that, but probably most of the boats that blown up were drug boats. Sure. That's not where they're doing it. That's not what's happening right now. Or they wouldn't have started with a lie with the fentanyl. And they wouldn't have started with boats that actually the only evidence we have is that they are supplying other boats that are going to Europe. So that's weird. And then it comes to the oil thing. I'm like, okay, I get it. I get the oil thing. Like, some people have pointed to democracy and stolen elections and stuff like that. Come on, man. Come on. All the people that we deal with around the world, you don't care about democracy. Literally. You don't at all. It's got to be the oil. But then it gets a little bit confused, right? When you throw in the fact that Maduro was like, all right, so it's about the oil, you can have the oil. You guys come in here and do this. Just come do the thing. You can have the gold, you can have the oil. We're going to stop exporting to China. Whatever we're sending to China currently, we'll just send to you guys instead. We're going to cut our contracts with Russia and Iran and China as well for any other things that they're doing. And you can have the oil and everything's going to be fine. Just let me stay in power. And we're like, no, we're not going to do that. Why? The best explanation here is that I think they really want this Maria Machado person to be running the place. They want someone that is just purely friendly, not someone that you have to hold the largest armada ever assembled in the history of armadas assembled. Like, you don't want to have to hold that over someone's head to get them to agree to this whole thing. You want someone who's just going to be friendly to business, friendly to capitalism, friendly to investment, friendly to American interest as it relates to China and Russia, and you don't have to like threaten a war to get them to do these things. That's like all I got right now on this thing. That's it. Oil, money, gold, control, jockeying for power over China and Russia. That's all I got on this thing. Now, the American people might vote in the affirmative if they thought that we were preventing fentanyl from coming into the United States and saving 100 billion lives a year. I think that's what the number's up to right now. Would they vote for this thing? Is that what they would do? I don't know. Is there a reason Trump just classified fentanyl as a WMD a couple days ago? It's a weapon of mass destruction now. This all seems, we get that this week. We got an announcement tonight. We got a blockade announced yesterday. And then we got the Epstein files getting released on Friday. All seems like it's shaping up to do something. All right, that's I think that's what I have today. I think that's all we're going to talk about. Yeah, keep all these things in mind. And at the very least, come on, y'all. Can Congress just vote on this thing? At the very least, I would vote against. Can we at least go through the process of how our Constitution and how our government is supposed to work, that the people who pay for this stuff send representatives to the capital of our nation, and their representatives vote whether or not they're going to force those people to pay for these things? Can we just do that? That's what I got. If you enjoyed today's episode, let me know. Tell me on X at Good AM Liberty. Tell me on YouTube. Leave a comment. Or just hang out with me in the Fed Haters Club. JoinGML.com. JoinGML.com. Leave a rating and review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. That helps the algorithms. All of these things help the algorithms anytime we get interaction with people, and we love seeing all the interactions most of the time. Kind of. If you do everything I just said to do, we'll be here tomorrow to talk about whatever it is Trump announces tonight. Could be a new crypto coin. Something like that. I don't know. Could be something just totally worthless. Could be like a pre-State of the Union address about how great everything is going. We've got no clue. We'll see what it's going to be, but we'll talk about it tomorrow. Until then, have a good day and a good morning, Liberty.